An increasingly unhinged Donald Trump just made a chilling public threat against blue states, and MAGA Republican politicians are lining up to publicly defend him. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video. Donald Trump's authoritarian impulses and his instinct towards political retribution towards Democratic-led states and cities is even more pronounced than it ever was. He recently spoke at Coachella in California, and then he proceeded to make a public threat against California, a predominantly blue state, a Democratic-led state, and by extension, we have to assume blue states in general.
We're going to take care of our farmers. We're going to take care of your water situation, and we'll force it down his throat. And we'll say, Gavin, if you don't do it, we're not giving you any of that fire money that we send you all the time for all the forest fires that you have.
So that was Donald Trump saying that unless Democratic Governor Gavin Newsome of California agrees to Donald Trump's political goals, political initiatives, political propositions, that he will withhold federal disaster relief money. Think about that. Think about that in the context of a country that was just ravaged, at least the southeast of the country, including red states, by Hurricanes Milton and Helene, and how the federal government under the Biden-Harris administration had to intervene in order to assist state and local governments. This cooperation between these three tiers of government, local, state, and federal, is essential to save lives and to restore communities. Local government can't be missing in action, state government can't be missing in action, and the federal government can't be missing in action. You need all three to cooperate. And here's Trump saying that, hey, unless you do what I demand, unless you give in to my demands, whatever they may be, I will withhold federally mandated monies that go towards disaster relief to your states. I will punish you, your party, and more importantly, the residents of California, because wildfire doesn't know political affiliation. Wildfire will burn red property just as much as it will blue property. It will kill conservatives just as much as it will kill liberals. And Donald Trump is saying if he becomes president again and Gavin Newsom doesn't do what he says, he's going to withhold that disaster relief. Gavin Newsom responded on Twitter, Donald Trump shows us exactly who he is, threatening life-saving disaster aid to achieve his political goals. We'll force it down his throat. We'll say, Gavin, if you don't do it, we're not going to give you any of that fire money we send you. This man is sick. And indeed he is. As a matter of fact, ACYN, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but it's ACYN on Twitter. You should definitely follow him. Aken, I don't know if it stands for anything, but he is with Midas Touch. He constantly clips these things. He put together a really interesting edit of Donald Trump spreading falsehoods about the Biden-Harris administration's response to hurricanes Helene and Milton and politicizing it. And then in the next scene, Donald Trump doing the very thing that he's claiming that Biden and Harris are doing that they're not.
But North Carolina really got hit. I'll tell you what, those people should never vote for a Democrat because they held back aid. They were so bad.
And we'll say, Gavin, if you don't do it, we're not giving you any of that fire money that we send you all the time for all the forest fires.
So by Trump's logic, you shouldn't vote for someone who's threatening to withhold aid from people who need it. Well, President Biden and Vice President Harris didn't do that. Donald Trump has repeatedly done that. So Donald Trump's logic is sound. And if it's sound, you shouldn't vote for Donald Trump because Donald Trump is the only candidate in the field threatening to withhold natural disaster relief for political purposes. The Democrats have never done that. As a matter of fact, I want to play you a short clip here in which a couple of former Trump officials were interviewed, and they mentioned that while they worked for Donald Trump, when he was president, repeatedly attempted to do just that.
Kevin, there are people who will watch and say, oh, he's not actually going to do that. He wouldn't actually do that. How do you make it clear to voters that he has already done things to imperil America's national safety and security?
Well, as you said, he's done it before. There had to be a lot of arm twisting by my former boss, General John Kelly, and good staffers like Olivia Troy, to get President Trump to send hurricane aid to Puerto Rico, to get him to send aid after the wildfires to California. I think in a second Trump term, if that comes to pass, you won't have people like General Kelly or Olivia there to try to help him to do the right thing. And I think terrible consequences will follow.
He's right. That is a former Trump administration official saying that Donald Trump, it would be bad enough if Trump were merely threatening what he was doing. It would automatically be disqualifying an irrational electorate. But Donald Trump didn't just threaten. He attempted to do. He did the very things as president that he's threatening to do if he becomes president again, that President Biden and Vice President Harris have not done. The moral inferiority of Donald Trump and MAGA Republican politicians is on full display. They are threatening to imperil the lives of American citizens to whom they are constitutionally and morally obligated to serve, regardless of whether or not they voted for you. And Donald Trump is saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I will endanger people. I will get people killed deliberately unless you do what I want politically. MAGA Republican Congressman Byron Donalds was asked about this on CNN, and here was his response.
Congressman, as you were just talking about the devastation there from a natural disaster last night, the former president threatened to withhold wildfire aid from California over the state's water and environmental rules. Listen to what he said. Are you comfortable with that, particularly given how you are seeing firsthand how important it is for federal help in a time of natural disaster?
Well, actually, Dana, this is a great question. I think when you look at Florida versus California, taking in hurricane force winds and massive flooding is one thing. There's not much the state of Florida can do to prevent that. You compare that with California's environmental policy. A lot of their forest fires are mostly caused because the state of California blocks the management of their lands. They don't clear the underbrush. We do that here in Florida, which is why you don't have the major issues of massive forest fires raging through our state. But California doesn't do the simple work of clearing underbrush. So who that really puts at risk are the citizens of California. And this is, in my view, radical environmental policy, decades long in that state. And so what ends up happening is that taxpayers have to foot the bill for this every single year.
Well, the
I think what Donald Trump is
California
really getting
Florida,
at is that California should actually take care of this problem as well.
As you know,
it is very different, but if you leave fuel on the ground in terms of branches and underbrush, it does contribute to larger forest fires. It simply does.
So are you saying that you're comfortable with President Trump saying that if he is elected again, he will withhold federal aid for fires in California?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not comfortable with that, and I think Congress is going to weigh in on this heavily. And of course, we're going to do what needs to be done. But so California does have to look at their land management issues in the future. They have to look at that, Dana, and we have to be responsible with the dollars that the federal government is going to be spending. We're always going to be there for the American people. Make no mistake about that. But
so again, he won't condemn Donald Trump's threats to withhold federal assistance. Whether or not he is personally comfortable with it is immaterial. He won't even say that he's uncomfortable with it. He's like, well, I'm not saying that, I am comfortable with that. But then you won't condemn it. You won't call it out. This is the problem, to say nothing of the fact that, Donald Trump wasn't talking about clearing underbrush. So again, it was a red herring anyway. He was talking about water. But this idea that unless you do what we say, we're going to withhold federal assistance. And even Byron Donalds' own logic, he's saying, well, California doesn't clear the underbrush. Well, even if we accept that, take that at face value, which I have no idea why we would, given that MAGA Republicans lie, but let's just take it at face value. His logic was California is not doing the bare minimum to save lives. So that justifies the federal government not doing the bare minimum to save lives? That doesn't make any sense. California residents are American citizens, I should say, and the California government has an obligation to them, but so too does the federal government. So even if you disagree, even if you have a legitimate disagreement, which I'm not granting, but even if I did grant you that you had a legitimate disagreement with Governor Newsom's, environmental policy, the president of the United States still has an obligation to assist. Think about this. By that logic, given the increasing severity and frequency of hurricanes, you could easily make the argument that, well, Republican politicians have stymied and undermined, and in some cases thwarted, efforts over decades to address climate change. And perhaps if they'd made different decisions, if they'd done the bare minimum to save lives, lives would have been saved if they had recognized the scientific reality of anthropogenic climate change, and worked with Democrats to stop it. So would Byron Donalds be okay if President Biden said, you know what? I'd love to help, but given that Florida's government has not done the bare minimum to save their own residents' lives by fighting climate change and actually fighting me as I attempt to fight climate change, I just don't think the federal government can really, actually dispense natural disaster funds. And we're not going to dispense natural disaster funds unless, Governors DeSantis and Youngkin and McMaster, these Republican governors, unless they agree to be fully cooperative with the Democratic Party's position on climate change. How would Byron Donalds feel about that? Byron Donalds would be apoplectic. He would be demanding that Florida saw itself off, the peninsula of Florida saw itself off from the continental United States and secede. So the whole logic doesn't really work because he would never subscribe to it on his own end. But of course, President Biden and Vice President Harris would never do that because they actually care about Floridian citizens or Floridian residents much more than Donald Trump cares about the citizens and residents of blue states. And on the topic of Donald Trump spreading misinformation about natural disaster relief, because, that second clip by ACYN pointed this out, that, Trump is still spreading these lies that President Biden and Vice President Harris are not providing relief to North Carolina and other places, and therefore you shouldn't vote for them. Again, not true. But as a consequence of Donald Trump's notions about disaster relief, so many Trump voters believe that hurricane relief is being spent elsewhere, even though it's not true. So only 35% of Trump voters believe that hurricane relief funds have been spent on people impacted by the hurricane. 65% believe that those funds are going elsewhere. It's not true. It is a unambiguous lie that Donald Trump is telling. And yet 65% of his voters believe it, according to a recent CBS YouGov poll. Trump's claims about FEMA hurricane funds going to people in U.S. illegally is believed by 83% of Trump voters, even though, again, it is not true. Not $1 of natural disaster relief funds by FEMA, not $1, not one penny, has gone to the southern border or to undocumented migrants. But 83% of Trump supporters believe it. That's where we are, folks. Donald Trump is deliberately fracturing reality for his supporters, and his supporters and the rest of us will pay the consequences of this. And this could be a life or death situation for many people who believe Trump's lies, who will not cooperate with the federal government, who will not contact the federal government because they believe the federal government has abandoned them. This is not a joke, and this is not funny. It's not serious, and it shouldn't be a political matter. But Donald Trump has made it a political matter, even as he is publicly threatening, if he becomes president again, to withhold vital natural disaster relief funds unless the governors of blue states bend the knee to him and agree to his political initiatives. President Biden and Vice President Harris haven't done that. They are morally superior to Donald Trump. And that's something you should probably factor in as you approach the ballot box on November 5th. Food for thought. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.